He locked the room for 3 hours while I sat on a chair that remembered my grandchildren's laughter and pretended it was still summer. I remember exactly how the bolt slid home, not with the whisper of a guilty thing, but with the polite, decisive click of someone who believed he had done the right thing. It was the sort of sound that takes the warmth out of a house. The walls seemed to lean away from me. Outside, voices rose and fell like waves, and inside that small, unfamiliar room, I had to steady my breath by counting the pearls I kept in my pocket. Was this how a daughter treats the woman who taught her to braid hair and to hide coins in a mason jar when bread was scarce? Was this how she repays 37 years of Sunday dinners, bandage changes, and sermons whispered into the dark? I will not begin with the soft explanations some tell when the truth is still raw. I begin with that bolt because every story of betrayal rounds itself around a single, small mechanism. I am old enough now to forget why I borrowed my daughter's guest room. I tell myself I only wanted to see the wallpaper that reminded me of her childhood, the roses she once pressed into books. But I remember the face that slid close the door, the man who would later become my son-in-law, and the way he smiled as if showing mercy. He said, "Mother, won't you rest a while? We'll call for you when dinner is ready." His voice was syrup sweet. I had a chipped mug in my hand. The tea inside shivered as if it knew treachery. When I tell you this, please imagine my hands, thin like old ribbons, yet not without strength. I had come from a life stitched together with thrift and sacrifice. My mason jar, you must imagine it too, sat on the highest shelf in my kitchen for years, warm with coins and folded bills for a future I always believed I would meet with dignity. Those coins bought my granddaughter's winter coat, patched the trousers of a boy who would grow into a man I hardly recognized, and paid for a bus ticket to a job interview when the nights were too long. The mason jar is not just glass. It is the weight of a mother's small, steady faith. My daughter had a different life. She lives in a house with marble steps and a garden that smelled of citrus trees I could only name from the language of memory. She married into a comfortable silence that made its own laws. Silence that could be dressed in silver spoons and polite smiles. When she was a girl, she and I had shared bread and gossip at a 90-cent table. When she was grown, I learned how wealth teaches a tender tongue to speak like a judge. Before the door closed, she kissed my cheek. It was cold as a winter window. For an instant I felt something old and foolish lift inside me, and then the bolt slid. The laughter outside turned into a mosaic of sound, forks, amused murmurs, a toast perhaps, and the room became a world without explanation. I sat for a long time listening to the house that used to be mine, as if it were a foreign country. The chipped mug left a wet ring on the old bedside table. I set the mug down and opened my palm to the pearls. A short strand salvaged from a promise my husband had never kept, luminous and small, threaded with the memory of a night at the theater we could not afford. I had worn them at his funeral and again at my daughter's graduation. They were my dignity in a string. I fingered them until my thumb ached. No one came. At first, of course, I thought I was being silly. Children forget, clocks lose their way, people get carried into conversation, so I knocked on the door. I knocked politely, like a woman who once knocked on her neighbor's door to borrow sugar. The knocking returned no answer but the muffled echo of voices. I called out my daughter's name, soft as a prayer. Nothing. Then the panic began, as tiny as a seed and as monstrous as a tree. Had they forgotten me? I rose and walked to the window. It looked out upon her garden and the stone path where 2 boys, my grandchildren, chased shadows. I watched them from where I stood, as if from another life, and my heart folded itself into something small. The lock had a keyhole I could not see into. The knob sat bronze and indifferent. I scrabbled through my purse for my phone, how modern we had all become, but the battery was dead. I had not wanted to come like this, had not wanted to be a burden or to insist on my place. This was my mistake. I'm not innocent of errors. I had believed, perhaps foolishly, that family would remember the small rituals that make one human. A cup of tea, the ache of an old knee, a hand to hold while a thunderstorm raged. 3 hours is a long time when you have only your thoughts for company. In the beginning, I nodded to the silence, as one might nod to a stranger on the street. I sang a song under my breath, a lullaby I used to hum when teeth were loose and knees were scraped. I counted the days of my life in the marks on the inside of my wrist and tried to remember. The first time I saw my daughter smile with the full light of her face. So often I banged on the door until my knuckles stung. Though I never wanted to be a spectacle, it occurred to me, absurd as a dream, that perhaps they needed a moment of privacy, that perhaps something important had happened, that perhaps she had finally forgiven me for the argument we had at her wedding. Hope is a proud, small thing that will not be crushed so easily. At the 2-hour mark, I felt foolish and tired. At the 2:30 mark, I pressed my ear to the wood and heard them talking about money. The word cut the air like a fishhook. My throat tightened. I put my ear to the keyhole and listened to the syllables as if decoding a foreign tongue. Documents, property, durable power of attorney, account, and then, oh God, change the will. I still remember where I was sitting when I heard those words. The chair was an old one, rickety in the part that remembered my granddaughter's kindergarten sketches taped to the back. I had used that chair to kneel on the floor once when my husband was ill. I had used it to teach my son to tie his tie when he was 16 and very solemn. It seemed obscene that in that same chair I should now learn that my name might be erased as if it were chalk on a slate. The sound of change the will made the pearls in my pocket go cold. I felt as if the room were tilting. My hands moved of their own accord. I took the pearls from my pocket and felt their weight. They seemed ordinary and impossible. I pressed them to my lips. I could imagine the ledger of their life, numbers like $230,000, like the neat round number a banker would give when warm with certainty. I could imagine papers signed on April 3rd. 2 days before the gala, my daughter had thrown for her husband's promotion. The night I had not been invited. I had been excluded before. In small, cold ways, a forgotten birthday, a seating chart that placed me at a distant table. But this sounded like surgery. The voice outside was not my daughter's alone. There was a man who spoke with a legal certainty. He said the phrase, durable power of attorney, as if it were a charm that settles nights. He mentioned a deed, a certificate of deposit, and a notary who lived 2 streets over. He even gave a figure, about $230,000 in the trust account, plus the house equity. The air around me went hollow. I could have cracked the door. I could have made myself known. But the truth about long endurance is that it wears a kind of armor. I'm not proud of the way I let the hours stretch. I must tell you what I did because it will matter later. I sat and I listened and I remembered. My daughter used to tell stories of how, when she was small, she used to make forts out of blanket drapes and insist that the world hide from grown-up problems. It felt cruelly ironical that she was now erecting fortresses of her own in which I was the uninvited ghost. A small thing kept me, pride. Fatigue? The fear of making a scene that would be retold with laughter at a luncheon center? I do not know. Perhaps I wanted to hear the exact words that would unmake me. Perhaps a part of me, the same part that used to put coins in the mason jar, wanted to gather evidence against a future that would say I had nothing to claim. I sat like a spy because, after all, the greatest weapon a betrayed heart has is the slow gathering of facts. At 3 hours and 7 minutes, my daughter's voice changed. That is a small detail I will never forget. A wife's voice softens when it hides a plan. A mother's voice turns brittle when she must choose between truth and table manners. She spoke as if rehearsed. "We must proceed carefully," she said. "Make sure the durable power of attorney is dated and notarized. Have the witnesses sign on April 3rd. He has been ill. You know how he worries about practicalities." I slid down the chair until I sat on the floor. And then I heard the most terrible thing. Laughter, sharp and confident, a small sound like breaking glass. It was her husband's laugh, and it meant the room beyond my door had taken on a new light. I could have knocked again. I could have burst through and demanded to be recognized. But if you have ever been a woman who remembers what it is to stand for hours in a soup line, you may understand a strange logic. the mind protects itself by calculating the cost of each action. To be loud in a marble hall can make you smaller than silence if the world will call you hysterical or needy. So I stayed quiet, and in the dark I counted pearls. I do not tell you all this to make a spectacle of my patience. I tell you because every betrayed person must hold on to the moment that changed their life as if it were a map. If you do not know where you were wounded, you cannot hope to stitch the place. That night, when the door opened finally, with the same polite click as before, they were all smiles and light. My daughter kissed my forehead in the high, formal way of someone who wishes to be seen doing the kind thing. She asked if I was comfortable and suggested I stay the night. The man who had locked the door guided me out with a hand on my back like a host showing a guest the way to the tea. Outside, the dining room was arranged as if for a photograph. The chandelier threw soft stars. I ate with a neat appetite while the conversation turned to investments and the improvement of the landscaping. Later, when I slept in the spare room that smelled faintly of lavender and lemon, I dreamed of the mason jar. In the dream, the jar was filled not with coins, but with names. Names written on slips of paper, arranged like a child's list of chores. I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth and a resolve like a stone forming in my chest. The next morning I found the mason jar on the kitchen counter where I had always kept it, but lighter somehow. I did not have the courage to open it in the daylight. Instead, I took out an old letter I had kept folded for years, the kind that always has the edge of tears. It was a note my husband had left when he was alive, a small scrawled promise. For our children, keep faith. The paper smelled of pipe smoke and lemon soap. There were small things that started to misplace themselves after that. A folded letter I had written to my daughter on her 18th birthday could not be found. The copy of the deed that listed me as a beneficiary disappeared from my files. A lockbox key I had kept in my Bible was not where it should have been. And then came the calls. Polite inquiries from a man who introduced himself as Mr. Winters from the law office, asking if I would stop by to update beneficiary designations. He used the proper phrase, durable power of attorney again, and spoke of ensuring clarity for tax purposes. So it began, slow and neat, like a vine finding its way into the smallest crack. I was a woman being displaced by a vocabulary that dressed theft in the garments of prudence. They made careful plans. They used lawyers' names and dates. They set the stage for erasure with proper papers and tidy witnesses. I remember putting the pearls into a locked box that I hid in the false bottom of my cedar chest that afternoon, as if hiding dignity could protect it. The box trembled a little under my hands. Perhaps it was the house trembling. I locked it with a key and slipped the key into a book called Churchyard Flowers and left it there, humming a melody that once soothed a baby. If you have the patience to read this, I ask you to forgive the small voice that interrupts now and then with sentiment. We are never as clever as we think when the people we love learn to create rooms in which we cannot live. But we are clever in other ways. We remember names and dates. And so I remember this. April 3rd, the gala, the neat signature of a notary. On a crisp document, the time on the wall clock when the door clicked shut, 7:12 p. Moas. And I remember the figure Mr. Winters quoted for the trust account, about $230,000. I will not forget the word durable power of attorney or the time reference my daughter chose to speak it, at 3:00 p.m., 2 days before the gala, when the invitations were still warm. I do not yet know why they thought themselves entitled. Perhaps shame, perhaps desperation, perhaps the slow corrosion of gratitude. But I felt, even in those early days, that this corrosive thing would not stop at coins. And so began a campaign of small deprivations that would, like frost, take the garden bit by bit if left unattended. I will leave you with this small thought, a moral, if you will, as the old storytellers used to say in the shadow of a lantern. The hand that hides the key from its mother does not think of the cold that will come when winter finds her. Justice is patient, but it is not blind, It remembers every locked door and every muffled voice. I never expected what I found in that drawer. They thought they had invested in time. I learned to invest in attention. After that night, the house became a geography I had to relearn, passages that led to papers, rooms where voices hid more easily than faces. I did not move like a woman in her 70s who believes she should be gentle and grateful. I moved like a punt on a slow river, quiet, deliberative, steady. If there is a crime that patience cannot catch, then I have never met it. Patience is the net the sea cannot see coming until it is too late. For the first week I watched without making a sound. I learned the rhythm of their days. The garden was trimmed each Thursday at 9 a.m. The driver came in at 8:15 a.m., and my daughter held a conference call every Tuesday at 3 p.m. with her wealth manager, a man named Carter who smelled of cologne and certainty. Mr. Winters, let us not forget his name, it is a useful thing when making lists, left the house most afternoons for long, purposeful walks. This routine told me where to place the small nets I had in my head. A lunchtime arrival might catch the gardener alone. A late-night return might find a ledger left open. I began by reclaiming small things. Crooked pictures were straightened, the chipped mug washed and left in its place, the mason jar reclaimed from the counter and brought under my arm to my own room. I moved with the light footstep of someone rehearsing her return. The mason jar was hungry with coins that no longer matched my notion of what was owed. Still, its weight comforted me. The pearls I had trusted to a false bottom remained where I hid them, under churchyard flowers where the key slept. The key felt like a warm pebble in my hand. I had one advantage, and it is a simple one. People who plot often forget the small rituals of the ones they displace. They forget which drawer one keeps the extra set of keys in. They forget the name of the bank teller who always gave you a sweet smile. They underestimate the elderly for their silence, and so they leave open the doors they intend to close. My first ally, a good story has small allies before the armies arrive, was Ms. Alvarez, a woman who worked at the neighborhood bakery and had known my daughter since childhood. She had seen my daughter at 17, hair unbound and laughing. She had also seen the way the girl became a different creature when she married. She is always smiling where it matters, Ms. Alvarez told me over a stale croissant and coffee at 7:30 a.m. But her hands are the ones who do the counting now. Her eyes flicked to my mason jar as I set it on the table between us. "You do not belong in the margins, Señora," she said. "If you want, I will make a list of the nights I saw the visitors and who came with them." Small witnesses matter in the early days. Ms. Alvarez began to keep a ledger for me in the margin of the receipt book she used to track wedding cakes. She wrote down dates, times, a mention of man with gray suit or 2 women late. Her notes became the arithmetic of suspicion. Another ally came unexpectedly, a young bank clerk named Naveed who worked at the branch my daughter used for years. I had once delivered tea to his mother when she fell ill. Small kindnesses returned like coins. Naveed owed me nothing, and that made his help less corrupt and therefore more honest. He agreed to glance at the public register for me. "Just a look," he said, "and report peculiarities." From these small openings, the net tightened. On April 6th, 3 days after the gala and 3 days after the notary I would later learn was in Mr. Winters's pocket, Ms. Alvarez told me she had seen my daughter signing a document in the garden at 4:45 p.m., a slim paper on a clipboard. That same day, Naveed called me at 10:21 a.m. and told me, in a voice that trembled like a man in a confession, that a deed of trust had been submitted for the property on April 4th at 9:15 a.m. "It's registered in the county recorder's office," he said. "Number RS 44012. He gave me the number as if reading a cookbook ingredient. I remember that morning distinctly. The sky was the sort of pale blue that suggests a clean sliver of life is possible. I sat at my kitchen table like a general before a battle simply because I needed a map. I wrote the number RS44012 on a scrap of paper and folded it like a prayer. I went to the county recorder's office. There is no romance in this. There is a hard smell of printer toner and people who like paperwork, and asked for a copy of the deed. The clerk there, a woman with glasses who had once been a teacher, said, "Anything else, ma'am?" and handed me the printed page as if the world had no illusions about mercy. On the paper was my daughter's name, and beneath it my own, crossed out with the neat stroke of erasure. The signature under my name was not mine. I could tell because it lacked the small flourish I adopt for the letter Y. There was a stamp of a notary with a number I did not recognize and a date, April 3rd. The deed showed transfer of equity into a trust, Maple Grove Family Trust, with my daughter and Mr. Winters as trustees and beneficiaries. The amount listed matched Mr. Winters's phrase exactly, about $230,000. This is the very arithmetic of dispossession, equal parts legal language and betrayal. I felt my throat close. On the back page of the deed, in a margin that seemed to have been added after the fact, was a notation. Durable power of attorney executed April 3rd, 1 p.m., witnessed by E. Harper, Notary Public. That name, E. Harper, looped like a noose in my mind. I had seen it before, the business card left on the kitchen bench that first night. I remembered Carter speaking the name like a password. I was learning to listen to paper the way my mother once listened to a baby's breath. Paper speaks in very clear syllables if one is patient enough to hear. The clerk at the recorder's office photocopied everything for me, and, with a look that suggested I had woken a dull nerve, whispered, "If you want to contest this, you should get legal help. Fraud is not taken lightly. How many old women have heard those words and then tucked them away like a threat? I tuck threats now into the pocket of my apron and take them out for inspection. The escalation after that was swift. Small exclusions, forgotten dinners, wrong dates, an invitation mailed to the wrong address became explicit attempts to deny my legal identity. A visit to my safety deposit box yielded a lock I had not recognized. The bank manager said it had been updated on April 5th with a new signature card. That signature was again not mine. Mr. Winters had begun to move the chess pieces with an expertise I had not anticipated. The house had become a stage where they performed the ordinary while they rehearsed erasure. A false ally arrived then, an attorney named Mr. Carter, my daughter's so-called wealth manager, who called me in a voice of condolence and offered to make things simple. He suggested a meeting of intentions at noon on April 12th, and I agreed only because it sent me another clue. I sat across from him at a long table in a law office that smelled of lemon polish and authority. He unfolded a folder and spoke of taxes and timing, of what could be resolved with a simple acknowledgement, and his voice was the voice of someone who believed paper could cure conscience. What the papers could do, they tried to do with a gracious hand. Yet every move they made left fingerprints. On April 10th, I overheard a conversation that would come to matter. I had gone to the house to return a casserole, a pretense for being near the rooms where they left their evidence. I found a waiter's entrance unlocked and slipped into the kitchen like a thing that had once belonged there. I stood behind the pantry door and listened as my daughter and Mr. Winters spoke into a phone with a hubris that sometimes accompanies wrongdoing. "Yes," she said to the voice on the other end, which I later learned was a bank manager named Ms. Larkin. "We have everything in order. The durable power of attorney covers the deed transfer, and the certificate of deposit will be retitled by April 6th. We have witnesses, E. Harper and S. Malone. The trust will hold about $230,000. There should be no surprises. I will pause here because it is the heart of my own small moral lesson, and Dumas would allow his narrator a brief moral aside. When men and women choose convenience over candor, they build a house of paper. But paper burns differently when truth touches it, and a conscience, once heated, will leave a burn you cannot wash clean. That is my aside, small but true. The names E. Harper and S. Malone circled me like two birds who had nests in the rafters. I made a list. Then, because patience had served me so far, I began to act. I called Ms. Larkin at the bank the next morning at 9:08 a.m. and spoke in a voice that was too small, too trembling. "I'm checking on an account," I said. "Could you tell me if there have been recent changes?" Her reply came slow but clear, a retitling on April 6th at 9:23 a.m. A certificate of deposit, cashed and moved on April 7th at 11:40 a.m. And the Maple Grove Family Trust listed as beneficiary. Every mechanical verb was another blow. "We require authorization," she said politely when I asked who provided it. A durable power of attorney dated April 3rd, with signature of E. Harper. There it was again, E. Harper, like a recurring character in a play who never exits. I had enough now to form a pattern, but not yet the proof that would make men in suits sit up and ask awkward questions. What I needed was proof that could not be argued away, a signature that matched mine but was forged, a notary who could be shown to have been bribed or coerced, a witness who would confess. In short, the smell of the thing is not enough. One must show the meat. The next move was not mine to make alone. Naveed, the bank clerk, arranged for me to meet a woman named Clara, a paralegal who had worked with the notary E. Harper many years before. Clara lived above a laundromat and had hands full of detergent and truth. Over tea at 2:30 p.m., she told me things that made my spine set to stone. "E. Harper is retired," she said, "but he still does notary work if you catch him at the right time. He likes money and he likes gossip. People like him make themselves available when the price is wrong." There, at the laundromat table, Clara produced a photograph. It was a small one, a glossy that looked like something the wind had chosen to save. In the photo were my daughter and E. Harper, she in a pale dress, him in a suit with a notary stamp peeking from his pocket, a pen like a wand between them. The back of the photo had a note in Clara's hand. April 3rd, 1:05 p.m. at the gazebo. I felt my breath leave me. The gazebo, where my daughter had once played as a young girl, where I had kissed her on the forehead when she left for college. If you have ever watched a rope join two cliffs, you will know the sensation I had then, the net of truth tightening and the fall of falsehood becoming visible. I asked Clara if she would go with me to the gazebo and see if anything remained. A piece of paper, a scrap of a program, a gum wrapper with initials. She agreed and took me there at dusk, when the light was long and kind. Beneath the bench in the gazebo, we found a scrap of paper folded into quarters. It was not much. A receipt from a coffee vendor, stamped April 3rd at 1:02 p.m., and a faint imprint of ink on the back where someone had practiced a signature. The imprint was faint, but my hands remembered their own motion. I held the paper like a relic and felt, as Dumas might say, the slow arrival of destiny. Destiny, however, still needed translation into a court file. As the days moved, my small network grew. Ms. Alvarez's ledger became evidence of presence. Naveed's quiet lookups at the bank corroborated transfers. Clara found the notary's old appointment book in a thrift shop, a slim diary with dates penciled in, and April 3rd circled, and the initials RS written faintly beside it. I felt like an archaeologist brushing away the dust from a strata of lies. But the final piece, the jewel that would change me from hunted to hunter, came by accident. Or perhaps by that providence that prefers the honest. On April 18th, while rearranging the attic in the fevered domestic way of a woman reclaiming memory, I found a box I had not opened in 10 years. It was the cedar chest my husband kept for his odds and ends, a chest I had not dared touch since the funeral. I lifted the lid, and there, folded in the bottom like a patient animal, was a packet of papers tied with a blue ribbon. My hands shook as I undid the ribbon. Inside, among clippings and a yellowed program from the theater, lay a single sheet, my husband's handwriting. The scrawl I recognized from 1,000 shopping lists and birthday notes. It was dated June 12, 1999, and read in his careful hand, "To be honored, should I not be to bear witness. Our house. A small annuity and all my modest goods to Isabel. This is my will. If anything changes, may truth be the light." Beneath his signature, his name I had not written for many years, but which I could not help say now, there was another note I had not seen before. "Keep this with the church pamphlets. Trust is for our children, not for those who would wear the name and not the heart." My heart leapt at that paper as if it were a good animal returning home. Here was a document unassailable, my husband's will, signed and witnessed by two men who had been friends of his, names I recognized. The paper smelled of cigar smoke and lemon oil. It was the sort of proof that could sit on a judge's desk like sunlight, and yet there was a contradiction. Alongside the will was a copy of a last will and testament dated March 28, 2025, a recent forger's mockery. The document bore my daughter's signature and, in small letters, a witness list. The signature looked like mine at first glance. On closer inspection, the loops were wrong. Someone, in haste or arrogance, had attempted to overwrite history. I stayed up until 2 a.m., the will on my lap and the moon an indifferent judge, and thought of the life I had been given and the life they planned to take. I resolved then and there to bring this to a proper lawyer the next morning. This would not be a private family correction. It would be a public reckoning. Before I left for the lawyer, I did one small, reckless thing. I reread my husband's will aloud and recorded it on my phone, a small device hidden in the pocket of my cardigan, in a voice that even I could not recognize as mine. I spoke the names, the dates, and the solemn words. To be honored should I not be to bear witness. Then, as if the world needed more evidence, I called Ms. Larkin at the bank at exactly 9 a.m. My voice was steady now. "Ms. Larkin," I said, "I have found the original will. The deed is fraudulent." Her silence was long enough to be a sentence. "Bring it in," she said finally. "We will hold transfers for investigation." I had the proof, paper that smelled of memory, and the bank's attention. I felt, for the first time since that bolt clicked, that something could be set right by truth. My hands had moved from trembling to purposeful. I had crossed the line from listening to acting, and yet the world had one last trick left. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed with a message I did not expect, a short video sent by an unknown number. I opened it with a calm I did not feel. The video showed my daughter, caught on someone's hidden camera, in a dim room, her face lit by the cold glow of a laptop screen. She was speaking, in a voice I recognized as the voice that had once read me poems, and her words were crisp as a knife. "Once the durable power of attorney is in place, and the deed is transferred, the house is ours. Mother won't sign anything now. She has been a problem. We will make it clean." The video cut with a click, and the last second was a flash of a name tagged on a document. S. Malone. I felt the floor tilt again, but now I stood on it with my boots at last. The evidence burned like a light. I had will, deed, video, witness names, and the bank's tentative promise to hold transfers. The choice I had to make was as clear as a blade. Go to court, make the claim, tear the paper roof from over their heads. I would have to name names, present proof, and set in motion a legal machine that takes time and patience. Dumas would have his narrator deliver one more small moral before a great act of revenge. Justice is not the hasty flame of anger. It is the cold, steady furnace that reshapes a life. Rage may fuel it, but patience tempers it into a weapon. Now there was no going back. I gathered the papers like a soldier taking his standard and stepped out into the morning. The air was crisp. The world seemed to hold its breath. I walked to the bank with my husband's will in one hand and the video in the other. I had lawyers on speed dial, not because I was wealthy, but because a friend of a friend knew a woman who knew a woman. The legal lady I would see at 10:30 a.m. had a reputation for not being crushed. At 10:15 a.m., standing on the bank steps with the papers beneath my arm, my phone vibrated again. It was a text from an unknown number. "We can make this quiet. Meet us at 2 p.m., Greenway Park, by the fountain. No lawyers, no drama." I folded the message into my pocket and felt the cold hand of a trap. The next step would have to be cunning. The courtroom is a field, and I was no longer willing to give them the advantage of surprise. My decision was made. I would go to the meeting, but not alone. I would take Ms. Alvarez and Clara and Naveed and, if necessary, a camera. I would set the stage with the lights on and make sure whatever they tried to do in quiet now would be done in view of witnesses. That night, I dreamt of the gazebo. I dreamed my husband's hand writing with his long, sure stroke. I dreamed of the mason jar overflowing not with coins, but with small, clean truths. At dawn, as I packed the paperwork and wound the pearls into a handkerchief, a thought brushed my mind like a warning. They had not only taken paper, they had tried to take my story, I would not allow that theft. I never imagined that the last person I would have to convince would be my own heart. I had to choose the quiet life of watchful hurt or the loud life of public rescue. I chose the latter. I would step into the light. I never expected what I found in that lawyer's drawer. I never expected what I found in that lawyer's drawer. It was an ordinary drawer, the kind where pens go to sleep and paperclips lose their courage. And yet inside, like a secret pressed between the ribs of a book, lay an envelope stamped with my daughter's name. My fingers closed over it before my mind could stop them. The paper was warm with the small hurry of recent handling. Inside, folded into a precise packet, were emails printed on plain white paper, a receipt with the bank's stamp, and a small USB drive labeled in my own daughter's neat hand for E. I do not know whether shock makes one quick or slow. I only know that the world narrowed and then widened with the papers on my lap. The printed emails were the map of a conspiracy. They showed messages between my daughter and Mr. Winters. They spoke plainly of timing and witnesses and the need for a clean signature. There were drafts of a letter to a notary, a scanned image of what claimed to be my handwriting, and a receipt dated April 3rd at 12:58 p.m. for a cash payment to E. Harper, Notarial Services. My name appeared in one line as part of the plan. Once mother is inconvenienced, we can proceed with durable power of attorney and move forward. The language was clinical, efficient and cruel in its ordinary tone. The USB contained a video file, a longer cut of the clip I had received, where my daughter's voice was colder than I had heard in years, and where, at the end, a hand reached into frame and slid a small envelope across a table. I had the smoking gun in my hand, correspondence, receipts, photos. I felt in that moment like a woman who had gone into a river to find a lost ring and found a chest at the bottom. The chest was heavy and full of naming. I did not weep. There was no room for tears once the shape of truth had appeared so clearly. Instead, I called the lawyer I had arranged to see, the woman with the reputation for not being crushed. At 9:12 a.m. on April 19th, I told her everything. Her name was Ms. Patel, and she had the sharp, unromantic manner of someone who had once been a prosecutor. "Bring everything," she told me. "We'll file an emergency petition for declaratory judgment and a temporary restraining order. We'll ask the probate court to freeze the trust account and suspend any transfers. We will request a forensic handwriting analysis and subpoena the notary." Her voice was all business, and in the business I found a strange consolation. We moved with the machinery of law like two people learning to dance in a strange hall. At 10:30 a.m. on April 20th, Ms. Patel filed a petition in County Probate Court. Petition for Declaratory Relief and Temporary Restraining Order. Case number 2025 PD 1124. The petition named the Maple Grove Family Trust, cited the deed recorded under RS 44012, and requested immediate injunctive relief to prevent further dissipation of assets, listing the amount of about $230,000 and the certificate of deposit retitled on April 6th. The judge, understanding the urgency, granted an ex parte temporary restraining order, TRO, that same afternoon at 3:45 p.m. The bank was ordered to freeze the accounts and to hold any transfers pending further court order. Ms. Larkin at the bank kept her word. The court papers were a strange and terrible music, affidavits, subpoenas, notarized exhibits. I felt as if the whole legal universe had been compressed into single sentences, and yet within them I could see the bones of my life reassembled. We subpoenaed E. Harper. We requested a handwriting expert. We asked for video preservation. We asked the court to order production of all records related to the Maple Grove Family Trust and the certificate of deposit retitling. I sat in the waiting room of the courthouse as if the benches themselves might carry the weight of my decision. Micro cliffhanger. The courthouse smelled like old leather and something like judgment. The hearing came quickly. It was April 21st at 9 a.m., and the courtroom felt both small and tremendous. My daughter sat across the room with Mr. Winters by her side, their faces a pale study in carefully practiced calm. Her smile was an attempt at normality turned thin. When she saw me, she wore the expression of a person who expects to be forgiven for things they imagine are minor. The bailiff called the case, and the judge, a man who wore his temper like a robe, asked for statements. My lawyer presented the will dated June 12, 1999. My husband's handwriting, the deed recorded April 3rd under RS 44012, the receipts for notarial services, the emails printed from the drawer, and the video showing her speaking of the plan. The judge listened with the interest of someone who understands that paper can cut as well as heal. We introduced a preliminary forensic report, a handwriting analyst, Dr. Fontaine, who had been given the signature on the supposed will and the sample from my husband's known documents. She testified that the signature on the March 28th document bore inconsistencies characteristic of a traced or simulated stroke. It lacked the habitual pressure and muscle memory found in my husband's known handwriting. Her testimony was a soft avalanche, precise, technical, unforgiving. Then came the moment that made me understand the moral economy of courage. Naveed, the young bank clerk who had once taken tea from my kitchen, appeared and testified quietly about the account retitling. He had noticed anomalies and had preserved a log, which he produced. Ms. Alvarez and Clara sat in the gallery and were called as witnesses, each recounting their observations, the garden signing at 4:45 p.m., the receipt stamped April 3rd, and the photograph of my daughter with E. Harper. Even S. Malone was subpoenaed and, in a scene that would have made Dumas proud, faltered under oath and then told the truth. He admitted, with a voice that cracked like old plaster, that he had signed as a witness at the request of Mr. Winters, that on April 3rd he had been paid in cash and had not examined my husband's identity carefully. His confession, offered under oath and with legal consequences laid bare, was the turning of a page. Before the final confrontation, let the narrator whisper a small, elevated truth. Truth is a slow, patient blade. When it is finally drawn, it cuts through the prettiest silks and leaves the guilty with only their hands to hide behind. That is my aside, short, knowing, and true. My daughter's face changed as the witnesses spoke. At first, she seemed to hold a composure like a woman in a photograph. Then a tremor of something real, fear perhaps, or shame, crossed her features. Mr. Winters attempted a defense, producing, in a burst of theatricality, a letter of acknowledgement purportedly signed by my husband. But the handwriting analyst picked at it like a taxonomist dismantling a specimen. The ink's age did not match the date claimed. The notary stamp on the letter's margin did not correspond to the registered stamp numbers of E. Harper's office on record. And the receipt had a clerk's stamp that did not belong to any bank branch in our county. Each small lie unraveled into a tangle of inconsistencies. The judge's voice, when he spoke, was not unkind, but it was clear. He granted our request for a preliminary injunction preventing any transfers out of Maple Grove Family Trust and ordered the bank to maintain the freeze. He referred the matter to the district attorney for possible criminal investigation into forgery and conspiracy. He also ordered E. Harper to appear for deposition. The legal machinery began to hum with the inexorable certainty of consequence. Micro cliffhanger. Her voice broke on the witness stand. After the hearing, the press, which had been whispering at the courthouse door, picked up the smell of a story. I had not wanted the cameras. I had wanted the law, but a truth that tastes of betrayal is a good feast for headlines. The next day, a local reporter called, and then another, and then a television station asked for a statement. I declined interviews. I had enough witnesses and enough paper. What I wanted was not to be seen as a spectacle, but to be heard as the owner of my life. The DA's office took up the matter. At 11 a.m. on April 25th, they announced an investigation into suspected forgery, conspiracy to defraud, and financial exploitation of an elder. E. Harper and Mr. Winters were interviewed. The DA's investigators discovered discrepancies in the notary's appointment logs. A courier who had been paid to deliver documents on April 3rd now remembered an odd exchange involving cash and an envelope. S. Malone's testimony led them to a drawer in Mr. Winters' home where several bank receipts were found, some with altered dates. The net, once cast, was finding its prey, But legal triumphs do not feel like triumphs at first. They come with a bitter aftertaste because relationships are not neatly severed by orders and stamps. My daughter did not come to see me during the days the case took its course. She sent a text at 1:02 a.m. one night. "Mother, I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I did not answer immediately. There was a part of me that is and always will be her mother. There was also a part that had learned the language of law and knew that sorry without the restitution of truth is a thin thing. I remember sitting in my kitchen at 2 a.m., the pearl handkerchief folded in my lap, and wondering if reconciliation could ever be honest now. The weeks that followed were a measured descent of social consequences. The gala my daughter had thrown in early April, where guests had toasted to her husband's promotion and where they had toasted me in the manner one toasts a relic, found itself a subject of gossip. Invitations were rescinded by some friends. Sponsors pulled their names from the program. The landscaping firm that had been hired on a retainer announced a pause in elective work. Mr. Winters's promotion at the firm was put under review as an HR investigation discovered his involvement in improper financial conduct. Business. Partners distanced themselves. The house I had once visited with the easy footstep of a mother was suddenly quieter in a true accusing way. The chandelier shone, but with a brittle light, micro-cliffhanger. She left a message I could not immediately play, and yet the legal resolution is where the story finds a shape. In a probate court hearing on May 10th, a date I will keep in my bones, the judge signed a declaratory judgment that recognized my husband's will dated June 12, 1999, as the controlling document and found the March 28, 2025 amendation to be a product of forgery. The judge ordered that the deeds and certificate of deposit be restored to the status they held prior to April 3rd's transfers. The Maple Grove Family Trust was declared void as to the fraudulent transfers, and the bank was ordered to return about $230,000 to the estate pending proper distribution. The court also ordered restitution for legal costs and referred the matter to criminal prosecutors. E. Harper was charged with notarization fraud and conspiracy, and Mr. Winters was indicted for conspiracy to commit forgery and financial exploitation of an elder. S. Malone was granted immunity for cooperation. The law, slow and careful, had returned the property to its rightful place. When the judge read the judgment, my daughter's face was a map of collapsed defenses. The gossamer of polite deniability collapsed into public records. She stood in the courtroom and wept openly in a manner that was both human and humiliating. Her apology then was great and useless at once. She said she had been carried away by fear and opportunity, and she promised restitution. I felt pity like a sudden ache in a tooth. Perhaps she had always been capable of this mea culpa. Perhaps the real crime is the absence of gratitude, which allows people to treat kindness like a currency to be spent without thought. But justice demanded more than tears. It demanded accountability. The criminal cases proceeded. E. Harper was found guilty in a trial that unfolded like a theater of very grown-up things. Bank ledgers, expert testimony, the USB with my daughter's drafting of the plan. He received a sentence that included fines and community service, and Mr. Winters faced penalties that included restitution and professional censure. Some friends attempted to rebuild the relationship. Others could not look me in the eye. My daughter, for her part, worked with the DA's office to make amends by participating in a program for elder rights financial education and by publicly apologizing at a community meeting she arranged. I accepted her apology not because I had no memory of the hurt, but because the human heart is designed to receive children back into its shelter when they show true contrition. When the public dust settled, the house was returned to the estate and the deeds were corrected. The mason jar on my kitchen shelf regained some of its meaning. I removed some of the money, a modest sum, and placed it into a new account in my name, a modest safety that would not be controlled by others. I used part of the restitution to pay for legal fees and to set up a small scholarship in my husband's name for a boy in the neighborhood to study accounting. I bought a small, sunlit flat with a garden that smelled of basil and lemon, a place I could call my own, and where I would not be a guest, but a resident. Falling action has a tenderness to it. It is the unfastening of one garment and the slow arranging of another. I found allies in strange places. The young man who fixed my heater would come by each Tuesday for tea. Ms. Alvarez brought empanadas and told me gossip that made me laugh until I cried. Clara, bless her, came with a basket of clean sheets and a stubborn grin. The world, in its strange way, stitched itself back around me. Micro cliffhanger. I found an unexpected letter in my mailbox, a small epilogue that brought both pain and relief. My daughter, in a private meeting on June 7th, gave me the strand of pearls I had hidden away for so long. She did so not with the theatrical flourish of a public apology, but with the tender awkwardness of someone who is trying to rebuild an old thing. "They were always yours," she said, voice low. "I thought I could make decisions for you because I loved you. I was wrong. I accepted the pearls because they are not merely a string of beads. They are the small dignity of a life." I placed them around my neck and felt the weight of history settle in the soft place on my throat. There is a final piece of poetic justice that I cannot resist telling. At a charity luncheon where my daughter had once sat as a symbol of success, she found herself speaking before a group of people who had known her betrayal. She spoke of accountability and of the dangers of treating elders as mere variables in financial plans. Some of the same people who had praised her were present and listened as the woman who had once tried to erase me now used her platform to teach other families how to avoid similar fates. The irony is not sweet. Forgiveness is not the same as exoneration. But there is a moral symmetry that Dumas would have liked. A man or woman who builds on falsehood finds that their foundation is too small to hold the weight of truth when it falls. And now, my reader, the resolution. The house was restored to the estate. The deed was corrected. About $230,000 was returned, and some of it used to clear debts and to establish a small guarded fund for my comfort. I moved into my little flat in July, where the light falls soft across the floorboards. I keep the mason jar on a shelf, now filled with small notes and a few coins for the grandchildren's visits. I have a new key in my pocket and a sense of quiet that is not cowardly, but is the result of having fought. I have the pearls at my throat, and my name once again on the deeds in the way that matters, as the recipient of my husband's simple wish. If there is a moral I hope you take from this, it is not merely that justice can be served, though that is true, but that small things remember. The mason jar remembers the small economies of love. The pearl remembers a dignity no court can give. The letter remembers a promise. People who think they can erase another's story forget that stories have witnesses. Friends who keep ledgers, clerks who remember stamps, young men who owe an old kindness. The law is only one instrument of justice. Memory, community, and the slow courage to speak are the rest. And so I close as an old woman who has been given back some of her life. I do not tell this to boast or to claim a final victory against the world. I tell it because truth once found a way to my lap and because I believe, stubbornly, tenderly, that telling helps. If my story has touched you, if it gives you courage to check your family's documents or to ask questions when things seem too neat, then share it with someone who needs courage today. If you want to hear more of what this old heart has learned about love, about betrayal, about small and stubborn justice, subscribe and leave a comment about a time you had to fight for what was yours. One last Dumas-like thought. As the curtain falls, Fortune may dress her children in silk and send them to banquets. But she always keeps one seat at the table for truth. Sit there, speak up. Hold your pearls to your throat.